When the FBI swaps a standard compliance check for a battering ram to gain entry into dozens of daycare centers across the Twin Cities, you aren't looking at a routine regulatory audit. You are witnessing the mandatory liquidation of a fraud-saturated market that has finally hit its systemic breaking point.
Breaking news this morning as federal agents are conducting several search warrants across the Twin Cities.
Yeah, we're going to go out live to our Bill Keller, who is following this closely for us this morning. He's in Minneapolis with the very latest. Good morning, Bill.
Good morning, guys. Well, this has been developing for the past several hours. Unlike some of these high-risk warrants, this seems to be a very methodical investigation that they are doing. We're going to give you an idea of what's going on. They're inside there. We saw our first look at a couple of tactical SWAT, or I should say FBI agents, Homeland Security. They're inside that building right now. This is the Somali Senior Center. We're in the West Phillips neighborhood. There's also a child care center here, so we're unsure which or both of these businesses is involved. Now, this is one of nearly 24 spots where we are told that federal agents are stopping today.
We are documenting an unprecedented hostile takeover of the Minnesota Somali business community by federal authorities, where 22 court-ordered warrants were executed in a single business cycle to reconcile a material breach of taxpayer trust that is now estimated in the hundreds of millions. This isn't just about feeding our future. This is about a contagion of fraud that has spread from nutrition programs into senior centers and childcare facilities, leaving the internal controls of the state of Minnesota in a condition of total functional insolvency. While the governor and the attorney general are being audited by their own legislature through articles of impeachment, the parent company, the Department of Justice, has moved in with tactical assets to perform a forensic extraction of evidence that state-level management was either too compromised or too incompetent to secure.
According to the FBI and Homeland Security investigations, agents are executing 22 court-ordered warrants across the metro area. We're told this is a federal fraud investigation, largely into some Somali-owned businesses. They wanted to be clear this is not immigration related, although the details of the investigation are still unclear. You're getting a look at some agents across the parking lot there. Most of these vehicles all unmarked. Again, this is not a big high risk thing where you see the SWAT type of stuff. According to Special Agent Matt Vogel, federal, state, and local law enforcement are also doing this as part of an ongoing criminal investigation into what they described as, quote, the rampant fraud of taxpayer dollars. Now, we're well familiar with some of the fraud cases that like Feeding Our Future that's been going on for years. Unclear exactly what is the target of this. We also see some Minnesota BCA agents here right now. We're going to continue to gather information about what's going on. We saw one individual who, in a gray car there that's pulling into this parking lot, who was stopped by agents. He's being questioned. We're going to continue to be here throughout the morning and bring you the very latest developments in our newscast at 11. But for now, we'll throw back to you guys.
Yeah, 22 warrants. We're talking pretty large scale here. This effort.
Going to be ongoing for today, so we'll stay on top of that. Thank you, Bill.
I am Camilo Motato, and this is Camilo's House. As a certified public accountant focused on forensic verification, I approach a mass FBI raid like a distressed asset liquidation, where the auditors have stopped asking for documents and started seizing the hardware of deception. In a standard financial audit, if you see systemic fraud involving nearly 100 individuals in a single jurisdiction, you don't just verify the receipts, you issue a going concern warning and initiate a total portfolio review. Today, we are auditing the Minneapolis mass raid. We are analyzing the materiality of the 22 search warrants, the operational default of Governor Tim Walz's administration, and the fiduciary conflict of Attorney General Keith Ellison, who is currently facing a hostile impeachment audit for failing to protect the public ledger. This is the moment where the audit trail of Minnesota fraud finally led to a battering ram at 7 a.m. The operational trigger for this morning's volatility was a massive, multi-agency sweep across the Twin Cities metro area. Federal agents from the FBI and Homeland Security Investigations, (SI), supported by the Minnesota Bureau of Criminal Apprehension, BCA, executed 22 court-ordered warrants targeting Somali-owned businesses. From an investigative standpoint, the scope of this audit is staggering. We saw tactical teams enter the Somali Senior Center in the West Phillips neighborhood and the Metro Learning Center Daycare. At the Metro Learning Center, the forensic entry was not subtle. Agents utilized a battering ram to gain access to the premises, In the world of forensic verification, when management, the business owners, is served with a warrant of this magnitude, it indicates that the primary source documents are so impaired that the authorities no longer trust the voluntary disclosure process. Special Agent Matt Vogel has certified that this is a federal fraud investigation into the rampant fraud of taxpayer dollars. While they were quick to redact immigration issues from the narrative ledger, the material reality is that these businesses are being audited for identity asset misappropriation. We've seen this business model before in the Feeding Our Future case, where phantom units, fake children, were used to generate fraudulent invoices against federal nutrition programs. By hitting 22 locations in one day, the FBI is performing a cluster audit designed to prevent the liquidation of evidence across the network. If these businesses were interconnected subsidiaries of a larger fraud scheme, a simultaneous raid is the only internal control that can preserve the audit trail. The management default at the center of this crisis belongs to Governor Tim Walz and Attorney General Keith Ellison. As a CPA, I track the cost of negligence. Federal prosecutors now estimate the total fraud loss in Minnesota to be in the tens of billions of dollars. For an administration to acknowledge this level of capital depletion without performing a full-scale prosecution of the providers is a material breach of fiduciary duty. Governor Walz, the almost vice president, is currently exiting the market by not seeking re-election, but his reputational asset is in technical default. A December audit of public opinion showed that nearly 70% of Minnesota residents believe he has done a terrible job addressing this fraud. When voter stakeholders issue an adverse opinion of that magnitude, the C-suite of the state is effectively insolvent. This brings us to the impeachment ledger. State lawmakers, led by the House Fraud Prevention and State Agency Oversight Committee, have officially opened the books on impeachment hearings for both Walz and Ellison. From a forensic accounting perspective, this is a fiduciary breach audit. The House Freedom Caucus has confirmed that hearings will begin next Wednesday at 10:15 a.m. in the Rules Committee. The allegation is that Walz and Ellison were aware of the fraud and willfully hindered the investigation, allowing the theft of public capital to run rampant. In auditing terms, this is a management override of internal controls. If the chief compliance officer of the state, the attorney general, is asleep at the wheel or complicit in the reporting failure, the sub-entities, the fraudsters, will continue to extract capital until the master ledger is empty. The systemic conflict in Minnesota is that Keith Ellison holds the legal authority for the Medicaid Fraud Control Unit. He is the auditor-in-chief for these specific transaction cycles. If Ellison himself is under legislative audit for his failure to prosecute the provider-side fraud, we have a structural deadlock. You cannot have the auditee, the AG, managing the audit of the governor. This is why the Independent Office of Inspector General bill is being marketed by Representative Kristen Robbins. She is trying to recapitalize the oversight infrastructure with law enforcement powers that sit outside the executive branch. This is a mandatory systemic upgrade to ensure that frugality, the word literally inscribed in the legislative chamber, is restored to the state's balance sheet. We must also audit the human capital impact of these raids. The manager of a Somali mall disclosed that the sight of federal agents is unsettling for everybody. While the presumption of innocence remains a contingent asset for these business owners, the social equity of the Somali community is being impaired by the recurrent theft committed by a fraction of the population. When a targeted investigation focuses on daycare centers, the shareholders, the parents and families, are left in operational limbo. One owner was seen walking out with his search warrant documents, claiming his center was still serving families. But in the world of forensic risk, a search warrant is a material disclosure that the primary auditor, the FBI, believes there is a high probability of criminal inflow. The forensic history of high-profile FBI raids in the last year creates a market of uncertainty. We've seen raids in Fulton County, the Letitia James indictment, and Maricopa County election audits, yet the recovery rate for these investigations, in terms of final convictions, remains volatile. Many voter stakeholders are asking, is this more raiding for the sake of raiding? As an investigative accountant, I look for the closing settlement. A raid is just a debit entry in an investigation. A conviction is the final reconciliation. If the DOJ and FBI are entering with battering rams, they are accruing a high legal cost that must be justified by a material recovery of taxpayer dollars. My forensic verdict on the 2026 Minneapolis mass raid is that Minnesota has become the capital of systemic fiduciary default. You cannot lose $9 billion to $30 billion in fraud without a total infrastructure failure at the top of the management chain. The FBI surge is a last resort capital injection of federal authority into a market where the local auditors, Walls and Ellison, have defaulted on their oversight covenants. The impeachment hearings next Wednesday will be the first closing on the Walls-Ellison legacy. Until an independent inspector general is certified and funded, the Minnesota Ledger will remain a toxic asset for the American taxpayer. I want to hear from you. Is the use of a battering ram on a daycare center a necessary forensic tool or an excessive management move by the FBI? Do you believe the impeachment audit of Tim Walz and Keith Ellison will lead to a total liquidation of their careers? Or is this just partisan theater in a divided market? Let me know in the comments. Your perspective is the only audit that matters when the integrity of your taxes and the safety of your kids are sitting on the negotiation table. I am Camilo Motato, and this is Camilo's House. Subscribe to stay informed on the numbers, the laws, and the truth behind the headlines. Stay safe.